Welcome to our very first Advice from Your Advocates. This is going to be a webinar series and hopefully a podcast that's going to talk to interesting people in the long-term care field and in the estate planning field to really get to the heart of some of the issues that we're all going to be facing as we age. And we expect this to be a really great series. This is our very first one. I'm certified elder law attorney Bob Mannor. Our guest today is the administrator or director at the Lodges of Durand, Jeri Birchmeier. Thank you, Jeri, for coming here. Our topic today is, what does long-term care look like in a post-pandemic world? And it seems appropriate based on our topic and just life these days is that Jeri can't be with me in studio today. She was originally supposed to be with me in studio, and we're going to have to adapt because of an exposure, which seems to happen every, we've had this in our office. We've had times where we had to, kind of either quarantine or make sure we shut down to visitors and things like that. So this is a sign of the times, isn't it, Jeri?
It sure is, Bob. It sure is.
So, Jeri, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first and your organization, which we've had great experiences with the Lodges of Durand. So you can kind of just tell us a little bit about your organization and what you do.
Sure. Well, my name is Jeri Birchmeier. I'm the administrator here at the Lodges of Durand. We have an assisted living, independent living, and then we have a secured memory care unit where we handle our dementia residents here. We handle each disease progress, each stage of the disease here, from mild to the difficult disease process. We have a locked and secured unit where we have wanderers here that can also wander around and be in their own home-like environment, but also remain safe in our building. We have an outside area also that we are able to let our residents go outside to get the natural vitamin D that they need when the weather is nice. That is also locked and secured here at the Lodges of Durand. We take great pride in our memory care building. We have a lot of training for our staff here and education with memory care and how to handle disease progression. We also, not so much with the COVID times, but we do education to the community to try to teach everybody about the disease progression and how to handle it and how to plan for the disease.
It's interesting you talk about the educational aspect of it. It's been about 2 years since we've had a lot of in-person education, and as you know, Jeri, we do a lot of that. We had our very first in-person education event that was well attended yesterday. So I don't know if that means we're turning the corner or it's just people are desperate for this information. So let's get right into the topic, if you will. So it's been about 2 years that we've been going through this global pandemic. And, this has been a big impact, in particular on certain industries, and long-term care industry has been one of those that has a particularly big impact. And we all see the news and things like that. And so what do you see as the lasting effects or the lasting issues that we're going to have to deal with as a result of the last 2 years and getting past this pandemic?
For us, it's a lot of the mental decline, the mental status changes, the disease progress of declining faster at a more rapid rate.
And what do you attribute that to? Why would you? Is that just more of the less being able to interact with with folks, or what other attributes might that come from?
It's a whole change in environment, and anytime you have an environment change for anybody in the disease process of dementia, triggers a decline. And without that socialization, without that interaction, we see a big decline when we have to isolate, especially when we have to isolate somebody to their room and they don't even have the socialization of other residents or the care staff. You see a decline.
That's interesting. It kind of goes into my next question, which is one of the things that I look at and I'll often talk to families about is isolation is a real thing. And Well, I'm never discouraged the folks from getting care in place. They talk about this in the long-term care industry, aging in place, and everybody says that's the best option. And it many times is the best option, meaning being able to stay in your home or maybe being able to stay in your child's home or something like that. But there's still isolation there. And that's the thing, is that there's not a lot of social interaction. There's not a lot of activity. There's not a lot of things that kind of stimulate the parts of your brain that's going to, sort of help prevent some of that deterioration that you talked about. And so, even though for a situation where you're in a community like yours, that kind of shows a little bit of the difference before and after. That's actually my next question: is what do you see as some of the things that were concerning you before the pandemic 2 years ago that now either has changed and made it either better or worse, or have amplified some of the concerns that you had?
I think the biggest change for us is 2 years ago, before the pandemic, people were more worried about the disease itself, versus the comorbidities that are coming onto it because of the disease. Like I said, with the mental status, the rapid decline, the isolation, all of that plays into factors of this. It's more of, you know, isolation and precautions, and more COVID driven than it is disease driven.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I found that to be true too, is that a lot of the decisions now are being made based on COVID rules, rather than some of the more standard operating procedures or best practices that we knew about dealing with, even the flu and other, things. I remember coming and visiting at the lodges or any of the other care facilities, and if there was a little bit of a flu epidemic, there would always be a sign on the door. There would always be the hand sanitizer and the careful things that were there. But it seems like, well, those precautions were in place. They weren't driving the standard, the operating procedures. They weren't driving everything. Would you say some of the sort of restrictions and rules are really more driving some of the, well, we have to do it this way? It's, by either mandate or just expected practices these days.
Absolutely, even as far as to sending a residents to the hospital. It's all changed and it's all different. It's all, based on COVID. Is there an exposure? What are the signs and symptoms? Are the hospital going to treat them, or are they not going to treat them? A simple fall that we seen 2 years ago from the before the pandemic, went got sent out, got x-rays, is completely different now. Now it's, let's test them first. Let's, see where they're if they're having any signs or symptoms before they even actually treat the actual problem.
That's interesting. And then we were talking earlier about something that I think is always an issue and always has been an issue, but now it's so pronounced, and that's the staffing issue. And I know we always try to find the best people and the best caregivers in your case, and it's always challenging and always has been. So this isn't anything new and not anything that you're not prepared for, but maybe talk to that a little bit about, the staffing issues and where we see that going in the future.
Absolutely. Staffing has been a big concern, especially these past 2 years. Even just the process of onboarding new staff is completely different. We got to get infectious control trained. We got to be able to make sure that these guys are mentally able to handle the isolation, because as caregivers now, not only are you taking the oath to be the caregiver, you're taking the oath to be the family, is to be the advocate. For the whole person versus the caregiver.
Yeah, that's, do you see any change in that in the near future? Do you see any progress on that, or are we just going to have to adjust our practices a little bit in the coming years here?
I feel that we're going to have to adjust our practices a little bit in the coming years, to learn that this is our new norm, and be able to plan and educate, and train.
And as a administrator, I like that approach. I have a friend of mine that talks about so many people are wanting to just have it snap back to normal, like a rubber band. We're going to stretch out that rubber band and it's going to snap back to normal. And I think the reality is that's not where we're going. That's not what reality is going to be. It's not going to go back. Now, doesn't mean it's necessarily all bad either. There's going to be some very positive developments that we had. Talk about the ability sometimes to even stay in touch more with loved ones and not have distance be an issue, and how we maybe adapted to some technology and things like that to make it so that
Yes.
we're actually able to be more communicative like we are right now.
Yes, absolutely. Even with doctors and services and providers like hospice and home care, we are adapted to, Zoom meetings and telehealth visits. Um, Maybe getting more of those so they have those eyes on their, residents and their patients and being able to help with, the care of them.
Isn't that amazing? I have a friend of mine who's a family doctor, and almost immediately they switched over to a lot of telehealth meetings. And I think for the first part, that's all they did, and then they
Yep.
kind of shifted to where they go back and forth. And some days of the week he's completely remote, and some days of the week he's seeing patients in person. And interesting how quickly that can be adapted. And I think a lot of these things that are probably advancements would have been resisted for many more years had we not had the necessity not been there.
Absolutely. Even as an administrator and a caregiver, like we have to adapt our thinking of, okay, we are the eyes and the ears of the physician that we are doing the telehealth visit with. So we have to learn how they listen for things and how they see things so we can perceive that to them.
That's really interesting. I just did a court hearing yesterday, I think it was. We have our producer Savannah on behind the scenes here, so you might hear her voice in the background as she asks some questions in a few minutes. But we just had our Zoom court hearing, and it's so much more efficient, to be honest with you. I remember sitting in court sometimes for 2 hours before our case is called, and it's so inefficient and so more expensive and just inefficient for the clients. And to be able to go on at a set time, sit in my office, not have travel time, not have all of that, have my client sitting next to me if they want, and be able to efficiently do government processes. There are some definitely advancements that we've made as it results in that.
Absolutely.
How do you feel that sort of the population that we both serve, which is, you know, typically an older population, and so historically or traditionally, the thought is, well, maybe sometimes older folks don't get quite as acclimated to technology. How do you feel that there's been or do you feel that that there's been a way to adapt, or that a lot more folks that are maybe wouldn't have used technology as much have now learned a new skill that can be really valuable and help them communicate and connect with their families?
Oh, absolutely. I think that it's almost been forced, for them to be able to have this technology and be able to learn from this technology. And that's again where we come off as caregivers, but we also come off as family because we're helping them to learn that knowledge. So they have that interaction and they are able to contact with families. 2 years before the pandemic, you didn't see the residents around with their cell phones and their iPads, and
Right.
now it's almost on admission that they're coming with that stuff.
It is kind of amazing that, for a lot of years, a lot of my clients would say, well, I don't really do computers. I don't really do maybe even email, things like that. Now they carry a computer around in their purse, or they carry a computer around in their wallet, and
Yes.
they've just adapted like the rest of us. So it's great.
Yep. And they know about FaceTime and they're wanting to FaceTime with their loved ones.
Yeah, and that's where I think it's can be, a real advantage, because I know a lot of times folks aren't always able to drive out to Durand or drive out to wherever the person is, or maybe they're in several states. And we've been, my nieces and nephews are spread out all over the place, but they've been able to communicate with their grandparents and things like that a lot more readily because of, the more increased use of technology.
Even for myself, I've had to learn, how to use FaceTime and dual calling and, just to be able to keep that contact for our residents and families.
Yeah, and how have you adapted as far as helping to train your staff to help the residents with the use of technology? Has there been any training for them to help them sort of introduce them to things that are going to be useful for that?
Absolutely. We have a wonderful activities department here, we kind of call her our IT guru. So she does a lot of education and training with the families and the staff. We also have programs like Life Loop that helps us keep constant contact, which is almost like its own app for families to be able to send pictures and us to send pictures and messages to them too.
Nice.
Just a lot of education.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit and go for some of the things that we have to be aware of, or some of the red flags or concerns that I think that, well, we had these before the pandemic has sort of escalated that. And that is that at Mannor Law Group, we've noticed that a lot of families, especially early on, but continuing, have either tried to or had an opportunity to care for their parents or their older loved ones in their homes or in the child's home. And while that can be a great option, I want to kind of talk about some of those red flags that we see to say, okay, we have to look at either maybe bringing in some outside help, or maybe looking at a care setting like the lodges or any of the other good places out there. But kind of talk us through some of the red flags that you see in working with families in that situation to say, okay, start thinking about these things, or start being aware of or being observant of certain things that maybe tell you that the older person or the senior is not safe enough or not getting enough interaction or enough care.
Sure. It kind of runs along the line of, burnout. When you have your loved one at home with you, you are not only the son, the daughter, or the sister, the brother, the mom, the dad, you are the caregiver. You're the med passer. You're the ones that are in charge for 24/7. When do you get to rest? Are they safe at night when you're sleeping? Are they up wandering around? Are they in the kitchen with open utensils? Simple things that you may not think about. Is there a knife in the cupboard that they could get to, or could they get out the door and in this weather get down the road and with no shoes or no socks on, no coat on, and get cold? It's very important that you watch for those signs. Are you getting burnt out?
Yeah, yeah, that was you said a mouthful there. That was a whole lot of good advice. It's things we look at just to kind of break that down. And when we're talking to our clients about this or talking with the families, a lot of times that caregiver is the spouse, meaning also an older person. Maybe the caregiver is in their 70s or 80s or 90s. And
Right.
so one of the things that I'm sure this statistic is that when we have a spouse with dementia or Alzheimer's or anything like that, and we have a caregiver spouse, it's the caregiver spouse that dies first most of the time. And we can kind of understand why that would be. They're the one that is maybe not getting enough sleep, maybe not taking care of themselves, maybe trying to, provide 24 hours worth of care. And the stress and anxiety is all on their shoulders. So that was one of it, is the burnout, the caregiver burnout, the frankly inability to do that. The second thing you mentioned was the wandering. And so when we have a client and the family comes in and say, well, we want to keep mom home, I say, great. One of the things I always ask is, all right, well, has she wandered? Has there been any wandering away at night, during the day, at a grocery store, whatever it is. And then the other one, I have two other ones that I look at as red flags. One is dehydration. If they've been to the hospital for dehydration, and one time maybe, and then they go back again, and it's dehydration again, or not eating properly, or things like that. Or worst case scenario, and this is awful, bed sores, things like that. Means we just need a little, in my view, and my strong opinion is we need a different or higher level of care than they're able to get. That doesn't necessarily mean they can't be in their home, but they're going to need more caregivers, higher level of care if those red flags are happening.
Absolutely. And then sometimes you have to, be very cautious of when you start seeing some aggression,
Oh, yeah.
especially to the spouse, it's very mentally taxing for the caregiver as well.
It's so tough when we see aggression because sometimes we've got, couples that have been married for 50, 60 years, or we have the dad or mom that is your dad or mom. And I'm sure through the years, there's been times where there's been arguments. And so, and it doesn't, it's hard to recognize that this is part of the brain functioning. It's part of their inability for executive decision making, and
Yep.
that it's the disease. It is not their personality now. They're not just getting angry or grumpy with you. They actually don't have the ability to do that. And I think it's very hard for spouses in particular, but kids also, to acknowledge, to recognize that this isn't just them being stubborn. Because I think a lot of families, especially spouses, will think, he's always been stubborn. Well, it's a little different than that now because of the level of aggression that sometimes we're seeing there.
Absolutely. And like the level of a facility or an assisted living or skilled nursing, they have that ability to have like senior wellnesses group come in, and they have a couple different doctors that can look at different medications versus being able to take, the spouse or the kids just taking the abuse and letting the abuse get further and further.
The one thing I'd like to give people a heads up on is when there is a start of aggression, we really need to make sure that we address that and get to the doctor, get to a setting that's going to make it less likely that there's going to be aggression. And maybe you can talk to this because what we find is if we don't get in front of that, and now next thing you know, we have a police report, or we have a ER visit where they talk about the aggression. It's going to be a lot harder to find a good placement if if you have a police record or a ER record that says that you're aggressive or that you could hurt people or something like that. That's going to be harder to find a placement in an appropriate care facility. So we really need to get in front of that. So what is your experience on dealing with that type of a thing?
Absolutely. So often I get, by the time they get to that aggression, that they want to just get them into a facility, but it takes steps to get into a facility and planning and, into a skilled nursing facility, when you're using your insurance, for that, you have to have a 3-night hospital stay. You have to have meet a certain criteria with called the level of care with the state of Michigan to be able to even enter the doors to that facility. Or a facility like us, you need to be able to make sure that we have the right equipment here and being able to care for this person, and the medications are here before they come in, and we do an environment change for them. So it's very important that they are planning this as at the minute they see this change of aggression or change of behavior with their loved one. Because it's not always easy as, well, we had an incident and now we're in the ER and we need to go to some facility right now.
Absolutely. That's a very good point, that I do think sometimes families believe that they're able to, once they make the decision, they're able to snap their fingers and say, well, we love Durand Senior Care, or we love the lodges, so we're just going to call them up and go there. That's not the way it works, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. And so, it's one of the things that I really think there are ways, and it's one of the ways that we actually work with families. Sounds kind of funny for a law office to be working with families this way, but we have care coordinators that we can help try to get in front of this. And the idea is that trying to make sure we get there before we get that police report, before we get that ER report, things like that. Because sometimes if you think about how the brain works, if you wake up and there's this stranger in your house, and because you don't recognize your spouse anymore, which happens very frequently, and now there's a stranger in your house, wouldn't you get aggressive if you woke up and you were disoriented and you see this strange person in your house? And it can't be your husband because your husband's not that old. Your mindset is you're in your 30s or 20s or whatever, and there's no way that old man could be your husband or that your wife or whatever. And so trying to get in front of that before it gets too far along. And sometimes it's just a matter of changing the environment, making sure that we don't have those triggers, that we don't have those things, so that we never get to that point of that high aggression.
Mhm. Absolutely. And sometimes, we see a lot of problems with, wanting to keep their loved one in their own home, is that their own home can be a trigger.
Absolutely. Good point. Yeah. So one of the things, how often do we hear people say that they didn't, that they're always constantly saying they want to go home? And they say, Mom, you are home. One of the things we've learned is you don't need to argue with somebody that has dementia. You don't need to keep trying to convince them you are home, you are home. You just kind of move on and distract to another conversation. Or another thing is if they're asking for deceased relatives, we don't have to remind them and make them go through the grief again that their dad died maybe 50 years ago, but we don't have to, we just can distract and kind of move on to the next conversation. So
Absolutely. That's one thing that we try to educate our staff here, is when they are having those moments, you need to live in those moments with them.
great, that's great. I like the way that you say that. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Absolutely. Like you said, when they are having a behavior and they want a loved one, or they want to go home, can you please call my sister? Can you please call my sister? We are trained, as dementia practitioners, that, you need to live in that moment with them. Oh, our sister went to the store, she'll be back in a little bit, and talk to them about it, versus saying, no, so and so passed away, she's not here anymore. That triggers even an escalated behaviors and aggressiveness, and can inhibit behaviors that would last, all night long, versus living in that moment with them. And, yes, our sister went out, she'll be back, or, or be the sister, I'm here right now, what do you need?
I remember when my mom was going through this, that she would say, ask about her sister a lot. And my sister, her daughter came up with a great answer for it, which was, your sister's with your mom, because they're both passed on. And so I thought that was a great answer to say, well, they're both in heaven. But she didn't say that part. She just said, oh, don't worry about your sister. She's with your mom, and that she was being honest too. So I thought that
Yeah,
was a sweet way to deal with that.
absolutely.
You mentioned something I thought that I really liked, which is the certified dementia practitioner. I saw that you have that credential, and that's something that we've had a lot of our staff go through and get that certification of certified dementia practitioner. Can you talk a little bit about your organization and what you try to do to make sure that you're training and doing the best that you can? A little bit more about the Lodges of Durand and your background.
Absolutely. I'll start with my background. So I started off as a nurse. Started off in the ER, went to an ortho neuro, found my love for the aging population, and then came to skilled nursing for a while. And then after skilled nursing, became an administrator. I did admissions a lot, so I got to go out to the different hospitals, meet different, networks like Mannor Law, and build contacts and help our elderly population. So, one thing that I've learned along my history is that, like we're doing now, education is where you start with this disease process. So with that history, it made me even trigger more to learn about dementia and the different steps, because dementia is one big umbrella. So what I like to do for our staff and even our families is we like to do a dementia training to where you can actually see what it's like to have dementia. A normal loud noise to you and I is just a loud noise, and we go on about our day. And a loud noise to somebody with dementia, like an alarm going off or a doorbell ringing, can trigger a behavior. And that loud noise is amplified 10 times for somebody with dementia. So making them understand what it's like to have dementia has helped our training tremendously to have and to care for our residents. Just something simply as knowing that, they have peripheral vision. They can only see in front of them. They can't see around them. So making sure when you're coming into a resident's room that you're in front of them, hi, my name is so-and-so. This is what we're going to do, telling them what you're going to do, to making them feel comfortable and relaxed in the environment, and they can actually see you versus coming behind them. Hi, my name is Jeri. I'm going to be here today, and they can't see you. They can't feel that comfort. So just making sure that our staff and our family members are, knowledgeable of that.
Yeah, that's really great. And so that's really interesting about the experience. And I've heard of that. I've not done it myself. Some of the staff here have, but where is it with the put on the eye equipment so that they
Yep.
actually feel some of the physical sensations that would be similar to someone that's experiencing a form of dementia.
Absolutely. With the certified dementia practitioner, you learn different things like, when you serve a resident a meal on a white plate and there's white mashed potatoes on top of that meal, and they're not eating, well, they can't see that contrast.
Mm.
We learned to serve on a red plate, that opens, where they can see the plate and then they can see the mashed potatoes, and then they can eat those mashed potatoes. It's simple adapting mechanisms that they teach you that you don't think about, when you're just learning about the disease textbook. This is actually living in the disease.
That's great, and it's great that your staff is trained in dealing with all of these nuances. Tell us a little bit more about the lodges where you're the administrator now.
I've been the administrator here for 2 years. My actually first day here was day one of shelter in place.
My goodness.
Yeah, so it's been a good 2 years. I'm very proud of this organization. We have 5 facilities in Michigan. I'm proud of the organization. They take a lot of pride in their buildings and in their residents and in their families, and take each situation into care. They do a lot of training for the staff and a lot of education for the community and families. They like to get involved, and that's very important to me. Not every person is the same. We all fall in a different. There's not a white and black disease process here. It's all a gray matter. It all evolves into different, and I like that they take that into consideration. They're very caring for their staff, which in turn allows our staff to be very caring for our residents.
We've had good experiences with the Lodges of Durand, and we've had lots of clients that have been residents there, and just had good reports. And that's, it's always this is always a difficult time for families trying to figure out the best answers and trying to figure out should we have a care facility? Should we stay home and hire caregivers? Should we hire family members? It's always something to work with, and it's great to have folks that are reliably, that whenever we hear clients, they're saying positive things. So we've had very positive experiences with our clients at the lodges.
Thank you.
Back to our topic here a little bit. So we've adapted quickly, and we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but when the pandemic hit, we had to learn a lot more technology. And so for our office, pretty quickly, we were learned to have people work remotely. We learned to have Zoom meetings. It actually opened up things for us so that we can work with clients that aren't as geographically close to us as historically. So we've had clients over in Grand Rapids or up in the UP that wanted to work with us, and traditionally we wouldn't have been able to do that, but with technology, it seems like all of this is possible. What were some of the adjustments that you've learned or that you've taught your staff, dealing with, to improve quality of care and, trying to deal with the new environment that we're living in? What are some of the adjustments that you've made?
For us, I think the biggest thing is to be open. Healthcare before the pandemic is a constantly changing environment, at a rapid pace, and now it's even more rapid. No, today is not going to be the same as tomorrow with, different guidelines coming out. We just got to remember that we took an oath to be a caregiver, and that, whatever situation is thrown at us, we have to learn to be able to be a chameleon and deal with that so we can provide quality of care for our residents. And we can provide them with a safe house, and, keep them safe. So whether it's, hygiene, or whether it's infectious protocol, watching more for signs and symptoms of different disease process. Everybody gets so wrapped up in COVID, we forget that there's still other viruses and other diseases out there. So making sure that we're well trained and, looking for those signs and symptoms. And like you said, technology, opening our eyes up to technology. You may have to make, a Zoom call. You may have to do a telehealth visit.
Yeah, that's, and that's been a challenging for us trying to, and I'm sure this is true for other organizations too, but occasionally in Michigan, we've had where most legal documents, and the legal documents that we're typically talking about, like a power of attorney or a will or healthcare document, most of them have to be signed in person. In fact, the law says that you have to be physically see them to sign it, and that doesn't mean over camera like this. And we were fortunate in Michigan that the governor and then the legislature actually made a temporary law that allowed us to do remote signings. But that law has expired now, and hopefully we get a new one. But it was interesting how working with care facilities like the lodges and others, and trying to work around that, and sometimes having to stand outside the window and we can see them, they have the documents, we're talking over the phone or something, because the law requires that physical connection to get some legal documents signed. And so how have you seen that as far as the need to, even deal with other professionals or make sure that they're able to meet with their lawyer or whoever else that might be needing to get documents signed or things like that?
Absolutely. And like I said, it's very important to make sure that you guys are like they're planning for this, power of attorney or healthcare documents, DNR statuses, especially right now, during the pandemic. We built COVID visit rooms that are completely isolated from our other residents, and that allows, a visit in that room
That's
6 feet
really
apart, and we are able to, answer the questions and make sure that people coming in are safe as well too, gown them up, make sure they're wearing the right PPE as long with our resident, make sure they're wearing the right PPE and be able to handle that situation with their elder law attorney or with, a professional that they need to. That's also how we've kind of battled our mental depression with, quarantine.
Yeah. That's great. That's a fantastic idea. I really like the fact that you guys did that. It can be a little unnerving sometimes. We did the same thing where, while we have the alternative of now having meetings that aren't face to face, a lot of our clients still like to have that face to face meeting. So we have all these sneeze guards all over our office now, which seems kind of odd to walk into a law office and then you have plexiglass between you and the client. But we're just trying to make sure we follow all those safety rules and things like that. So it's interesting to see, and that I really like that idea of having the room for that.
Absolutely.
One of the things I think we should address, and certainly something that made the news a lot, on a national level, and we heard a lot about it in New York, and some in Michigan about the mass infections that kind of had gone through a number of care facilities, especially some of the ones that are like you say, skilled care. That this was a big issue, and sometimes the law was, well, send them to the skilled care. And I don't know, you're not currently in skilled care, but you have some previous experience with that. And I'm sure that there was some level of that throughout every care setting and home care agencies too. And my question on that is, how have you dealt with that and helped your team and your employees deal with that and just kind of stay positive and not resilient to all of the difficulties that can bring up, and you never know from week to week whether there's going to be another outbreak and things like that. How have you how you guys have been getting by?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of negativity, along with this pandemic. So, we preach positivity absolutely here. The biggest thing is we make sure that, our staff is mentally taken care for themselves. We offer, different options as to free counseling, with, different professionals. We offer, breaks and, like I said, training and education, making sure that they feel appreciated. We know that they're the caregiver and the family at times. We want to make sure that they stay safe too. They know that there is a risk being a healthcare professional working the front lines. Skilled nursing definitely is working the front lines. So we try to prepare the best we can. We try to, prepare for outbreaks and know they're coming. Whether that's setting off a wing that 4 or 5 rooms for if we do have positives. Teaching staff different infectious protocols, making sure they're wearing the mask, washing their hands, and following the guidelines for all viruses.
Yeah.
Universal precautions.
Well, that's great to hear that you've been, protecting your staff too, because I know, that's something, and I think every business, every organization has had to do that to provide a little bit of more emotional support and backup for just having to deal with all the things and all the changes and all the stress that can come about from the last couple of years here. Well, I'd like to open up the floor for some question and answer from the audience if we have any questions. And I mentioned earlier we have our producer Savannah, so the voice without a face right now because she's off camera, but she's gonna maybe if there's any questions, she'll read us the questions and then we can respond to those.
Yes, hello, I am Savannah, the voice in the background. We do have some questions. One question was submitted ahead of time, but we had Carol, and she said that her husband has recently been diagnosed with dementia. She's feeling overwhelmed already, and so she right now is his primary caregiver. She's looking at options, and so she just wants to know what steps she should be taking now to prepare for, the potential of long-term care.
Absolutely. The best thing that I can tell her to start to do is to prepare to make sure, that she's got all of her legal documents ready to go. Make sure that you are out there touring all different types of facilities and all different locations. Ask as many questions you can. Tour at multiple different times throughout the day. You may have to tour a couple of them 2 or 3 times until you find one that you feel comfortable with.
It's a great question, and we have a presentation that we started doing, which I'm sure will come out to the lodges and do it at some point once things open up to be able to do that. But the presentation is titled, what are the 3 steps you immediately need to take once you have a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's. So we have the 3 steps, and it's an hour and some presentation, but I'm just going to summarize the 3 steps that we talk about. One is exactly what you said. Well, it's pretty much all of the things that you said, but the first one is that we break it down into the 3 steps is to make sure that you have your legal arrangements in order. And we talk about sort of dementia specific legal arrangements. The issue is this is not really something that is taught in law school very much to deal with dementia, to deal with things like government benefits, like Medicaid or veterans benefits. So sometimes the legal documentation, you might have a great, fantastic lawyer, but if they aren't one that really focuses on the dementia issue or the long-term care issue or Medicaid or veterans benefits, A lot of times we find that there's some additional language or additional information that we're gonna wanna include in things like your power of attorney. It's so important if we're still able to get a power of attorney. If not, then we might have to go to court and get guardianship or conservatorship. Step number 2 is develop that team. So, and we really need to think about that team. In other words, we think about obviously the legal is part of it. The healthcare is part of it. Make sure that we've got a doctor that's on board with this and is helping and talking to us about the effects of dementia. A lot of times, your family practice lawyer or doctor might get you to a neurologist, which is great. We want to see that. We want to, have that neurologist in the team. But I really like to have the family work with the gerontologist too. And sometimes the gerontologist can take kind of a big picture look at it, because whereas the neurologist is looking at the brain and the cardiologist is looking at the heart and the podiatrist is looking at the foot, the gerontologist kind of looks at the big picture and often is a little bit more whole person, centered. And I really do think that that's part of the team that we should develop. Financial, sometimes we're going to be looking at, okay, what are the finances? How do we make sure we have access to them? How do we make sure we have if you're not able to pay your bills, who's going to pay those bills? Yes, there's a legal part of it, but there's a financial part of it too. If depending on, the resources that you have, we may need a financial person in that team. And then the caregiving part of it is, let's look at our options for caregiving. So if we're going to be looking at home care, what are our options? Are we looking at family? Are we looking at home care agencies? Should we start at looking at independent living, which is more of a protective environment? So home is fine, but you're not getting much exposure and you're off by yourself, and to get caregivers in, they got to drive to you. Whereas an independent environment, like, one of the options that you have at the lodges, you got caregivers close by. They don't have to just come there for 3 hours at a time. It's much more flexible, much more protected. So look at the environment, look at the caregiving options. So that's step 2. And step 3 is having the contingency plan. So I don't know if you experienced this, Jeri, but in my experience, most families that are dealing with this, first of all, there was maybe a little bit of denial at first. Maybe it was, oh, everything's going to be fine. They're just getting a little older. But sometimes they come to that conclusion, and often it is because of a crisis, because of a broken hip, because of a hospital stay, because of somebody wandering away and the neighbor's calling or the police is calling or somebody like that. But the idea is to get in front of that. And so to get in front of the other shoes that might drop, the other bad things or crises that could happen, like, well, what if mom dies? When dad's the one with dementia, what if mom dies? What if mom can't care for dad anymore? What if mom gets sick? What if there's a stroke? What if the caregiving needs get up? So dealing with those, that's step 3, is kind of having, and again, it's helpful using your professionals, that group of professionals we had in step 2, to come up with this plan to say, okay, we don't want to be behind behind it again. We don't want to have this crisis. There's probably going to be another crisis, and I don't mean to be gloomy Gus about this, but there's probably going to be another crisis. So let's make sure that we're prepared for that, rather than everybody kind of having to drop everything and fly to Michigan to deal with it or whatever. And so those are our 3 steps. We also, I'll just do a little quick promo. We just did a book. It's called You're Not Alone, Living with Dementia. So anybody that's interested in the book, feel free to get a hold of us. We'd be happy to get you a copy of the book. And it really kind of goes through a lot of stuff we've been talking about here.
Awesome. We also have another question, and this is for both of you. But how do you each find the balance between advocating for elders and your relationships with them during these very personal times and these very personal situations?
It's hard. It's very hard. Like I said, you're the caretaker, but you're also the family and the advocate. We have to just do what's right for our patient. What's right for them right now. What's going to be the best avenue for them to keep them safe and as healthy as we can.
Yeah, it's a really difficult question, honestly, because
Yeah.
on one hand, it's helpful for when I'm dealing with this, with a client. It's helpful for me to maintain a little bit of a distance, because then I can be that outside that can kind of stay out of the emotions of it. I can give better advice that way. And so it's difficult when it is family, for example. So I've gone through this personally in the last 2 years, and the idea is it's much more difficult. It's much easier for me to give advice to a stranger and dealing with all of these things. It's much more difficult when it's personal to you. It's much more difficult to say, okay, but we know what the right answer is. And it's one of the things that people either like about me or dislike about me, but I tend to be pretty direct and blunt, and which I think is necessary in this. And you can't always do that with family. And so my only advice, and it's what I had to rely on, and I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm working with families that have dealing with long-term care and dementia for years. I had to get an outsider. I had to have another professional come in and be able to give us advice with that sort of somewhat of distance perspective, because it's so difficult if you're trying to deal with the family and you have the family meeting, but there's so much, emotion in it. It's your spouse, it's your parents, those types of things. Then it's very, very helpful. And to frankly, to tamp down some family conflict or family concerns by getting an outsider to come in and kind of give the more, you know, take a step back and kind of look at it and say the things that we're all probably thinking but don't want to be able to say out loud because they're not always positive. And so, a lot of times we're going to want to say, we just published a blog recently, Savannah, that said, don't be careful what you promise. Because I think most of us have promised our parents that they'd never need a nursing home, whatever that meant to us at the time. And so nursing home is kind of a term of art that we use, but a lot of folks look at it as you're never going to have to leave your home. Well, that's a promise you can't keep. That's just a promise you can't keep. And so it's difficult to take, kind of step back and say, well, we know what the right answer is. It's not safe to leave mom alone at home anymore. It's not safe if she might wander away in the middle of the night or in the winter or things like that. We know that answer, but we can't, because of the emotions and the perspective, we can't, it's hard for us to say that out loud or come to that conclusion. That's why it's helpful to bring in outside professionals. And that's actually something that we do for our clients. And I think that's probably something that you have to, when, you have families and they're not so sure, sometimes you just have to, be direct with them and say, okay, well, how safe is it for mom at home and things like that.
Absolutely.
And I think our last question today, we can just sum it up, and this is a short question, but a loaded question. What is one thing that you wish you could say to a family who is struggling with this right now, whether it's the decision to put their loved one into long-term care, or maybe to just evaluate the care that they're currently receiving? What's one thing that you just would like to say to that family?
I think for me on my side is, I'd like to tell that family member, make sure that you are taking care of yourself as well. Making sure that if you're going to be the caregiver, that you're giving yourself a break. And know that if you can't be the caregiver, that doesn't mean you're failing them. It means you're giving them the care that they need.
Yeah, just to add on to what Jeri said, one of the things that we often experience is that instead of the family now feeling like they're, the caregiver and they're no longer the spouse or the child, once we can bring in outside care or go into a care setting that's properly taking care of them, they can go back to being the spouse. They can go back to being the daughter, because they're not having to clean them up. They're not having to, shower them. They're not having to have that constant burden of care. That's why we have the caregivers in the care setting, and we can go back to visiting and looking at old pictures and, and having it be more like that. My first thought is that make sure that you have resources that can explain the long-term care environment. There's so many options. If you try to just go to the Council on Aging book and sort through it, there's hundreds of options there, and you really have to understand sort of the difference between independent living and assisted living and memory care and skilled care and adult foster care and daycare and home care. And from our perspective, not only do you have to understand the differences between the two, but what programs will work with them. You know, there's all these different government programs that might help provide some care, like the Veterans Benefit, or there's Veterans Health Services, or there's, you know, the PACE program or the waiver program, and there's all these different programs, and they don't all work in every setting. And so it's really important to get that information. It's hard to get. That's something that we provide to folks, but that would be my first instinct to say, okay, in order to start really dealing with this, you really got to get clarity on what the long-term care field looks like, and not just, you know, narrow in on, well, we got to keep mom home no matter what. We really have to have that might be the answer, but you need to know what the other options are.
And even if that is the answer, you always want to have a backup plan.
Right. That's great advice, Jeri, because what happens all the time is people say, okay, we're going to keep mom home no matter what. And then, you know, it doesn't take long. Again, I kind of prod people a little bit. It doesn't take much prodding to say, but what if dad died? Oh, yeah, well, we couldn't keep mom home then. Or, you know, well, what if she needs a 2-person assist? Yeah, we couldn't keep mom home then. You know, what if, you know, there's so many different things. And so I think that's a fantastic instinct to say, hey, we want to keep her in this environment, but you're right, you have to have, well, but what if, you know, what if next, and have a plan for that. Well, great. This is an exciting first for us to have the advice from your advocates. I appreciate Jeri Birchmeier helping us out on our very first broadcast. This is something that we hope to do more often, and we'll have hope they have a pretty consistent schedule going forward. So we appreciate you joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next time too.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Jeri.